If you're a commercial landlord, the chances are that you collect the common area maintenance, taxes, and insurance from your tenants. I call it TCAM, taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. It's the second half of a triple net lease. Base rent is the number that everybody remembers, but the reimbursements add up to a lot. In my experience, they add up to about 30 cents on the dollar. Those reimbursements, TCAM, taxes, insurance, the common area maintenance looks like parking lot maintenance, snow removal, dumpster and rubbish removal, the cost of a property manager. All those bills add up like clockwork throughout the year. And in large buildings, those are handled accordingly. Someone is responsible for reconciling TCAM, but in smaller buildings, normally that falls on the owner. And for a busy owner, that may not get done. It may not ever be billed at all. And I'm going to show you why taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, TCAM, is a big deal. So let's take this property. This is a real anonymized client case study. There's a retail strip with 4 tenants. And there's a hotel next door, and that's important because there's a cross easement agreement where 10% of the hotel taxes, flow into this retail strip. So, super small building, real numbers. And here's how it's supposed to work. Your tenants pay you a monthly estimate, call it a little cushion on top of rent each month. And once a year, someone sits down and does a true up. They compare the estimates versus the actuals and they settle the difference. This is your bean counter. This is your doctor digits. No, but actually, like, a lot of money hides in this true up. And, this once a year true up is the entire game. If you never send them estimates, well, that's another story. That's actually what happened with this client. They never settled up on the TCAM. And there's a good reason why, it doesn't happen, right? So take his admin team, right? He's got the bookkeeper who daily is categorizing transactions, matching invoices to deposits and bills to expenses, right? Typically, a lower level employee, they may get paid 40 or 50 an hour. Maybe they're outsourced to Indonesia and you're paying them a lot less. You have your attorney who wrote up the leases in the first place. And I'm sure that if you're a commercial landlord, you're privy to some of the information in these leases. And then you have your CPA who files the return. And, although, the bookkeeper deals with the books, the bookkeeper's not going to read the leases. And although the attorney writes the leases, they're not going to deal with the books. And the CPA, right, he's just filing your return. He's not auditing your taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance unless you ask them to, and you're paying $300 an hour to do that for an uncertain outcome, right? So the problem is that the TCAM reconciliation really falls between, the functions. It falls between the chairs, if you will. And it's nobody's job. So high level, let me tell you about a landlord who owns that plaza, right? There's a sub shop, a Mexican restaurant, a coffee shop, and a wireless store. He's never reconciled TCAM in 4 years. Collectible as of today, 4 years later, over the years, $176,000 approximately. But there is $97,000 that he cannot collect because of a clause in one of the leases. Crazy. $95,000 because of a clause in one of the leases. Let's go find this clause. This clause says, within 120 days after the end of each calendar year, landlord shall furnish to tenant a statement certified as complete and correct. Here's the key part. Tenant shall not be required to reimburse the landlord for any amounts claimed, paraphrasing, if the statement is not produced by the landlord within the time period referenced above. Ouch. Missed the window, and the whole TCAM for that year is waived. Not late, it's waived. That is a good lawyer, and that is what happens when you have large corporations coming into, a small mom and pop lease agreement. Okay, so although he was owed, a little over $250,000, to just sort of, In the beginning of the video, I mentioned that TCAM runs about 30 cents on every dollar. And here's the breakdown for each tenant. Now, each tenant has different provisions in their lease, a different rule book, right? Which I'll show you here. There's a lot of parts of this, but the main ones are there's an admin fee and then there's a cost cap. And the admin fee, basically says, these are all the expenses, that are pooled, the common area maintenance. And on top of that, we're going to charge an additional 15%, 15 plus 5% of your billings, 10% fee, right? Flat rate, whatever it is to, whatever, cover costs of like property management, etc. Right? It's different lease to lease. And depending on whatever the first year, I think for this, it was 2022, whatever the CAM pool of expenses comes in at, those every subsequent year, it's capped at 5% of the previous year. So 105% of the previous year. Now for our wireless store, it's a flat fee. And this is another national chain. And the difference, right, is about $8 a square foot that the landlord has to eat. Boy, it's just eating money. Eating money. So let's take a look at some of these caps. So we've got capable cost for the year, right? This is pulled from the general ledger. Over cap carried in from last year, okay? Subject to the cap. These are a total pool of expenses here, right? But they're capped, right? So this is year one. And, this is 105% of each subsequent year. So this is really what's billable, right? This number that's subject to the cap, all these expenses that hit in 2022, I don't think was a full year, which is why it's lower. This is really all we can do because we're going off of 2022. And there's a carry over the cap. So basically that means that this is just going to keep growing 105% until, we resolve that difference. All right, and then we have the costs that are never capped, right? Snow and insurance. Guess there was no snowstorms in 2023, right? So you've got your billable costs, right? Plus the stuff that's never capped, right? And so we're doing this for the sub shop, right? And we're looking at total costs, right? Plus a 15% admin fee gets us to total billable, right? And what's the pro rata share of that? Okay. And again, this is just sort of common area maintenance for the sub shop, which is less than 20% of, the lease, or less than 20% of, the square footage of the entire retail building. Right. And there's some, complexities, right? Like the tax year is different than, the fiscal year. So the tax year runs July to June, right? So you'll get pieces of two different tax bills. But the books, run January to December. And, even though neither of them tie, because there's a timing difference, like they're both right. And here's a closer look at those. We look at the taxes paid in the general ledger, right? With no backup, just an Excel sheet. And then we look at, the total square footage of the retail parcel times the town assessed value. So they may have, $28 per, whatever, 1,000 square feet or whatever it is, right? And we multiply that by the total square footage of like the lot of the land, right? And we sort of have this difference here, but like it's pretty close, right? Like it might average over, 4 years, it might average a few grand, right? Which is like, whatever, less than 10%. So we know that we're close, right? Like we hold up what the town says versus like what hit the books, and we know we're close. And, of course, there's a cross easement agreement, right? Because, the hotel shares part of this parcel, and the part of the hotel land, has to be paid by the retail stores. And why is that? Is because the retail stores benefit from the hotel being next to it, right? So it makes sense. It's the total tax pool. So what's the share of each tenant's, total tax bill? And look at that. Of the 95 grand for the coffee shop, $67,000 of it is taxes. Taxes is the big part of, TCAM. It's the largest part by far. Do not want to forego collecting those taxes. So what happens now, right? The 2 restaurant leases allow late billing. So statements for all 4 years are drafted and ready with every tax bill and every invoice attached, right? Like this analysis on its own is not enough. You need the backup documentation to send them because their lawyers, their accountants are going to comb over it. They'll fight the vague stuff, right? Like anyone can follow this calculation, but just like the IRS needs backup. But for the coffee shop, right? If we don't send out the landlord statement for the prior year by April 30th of the following year, you're not going to collect it. So you better bill that on time. All right, the takeaways from this video. If you own a commercial property and we're going to do a reconciliation for the TCAM, right? You got to pull every lease, right? Find out like what you get reimbursed for and the reconciliation clauses, right? Build this model in Excel or look at the presentation model attached in the description, right? You can go off of that to sort of build your own. Check if there's any deadlines in case you need to get the landlord statement out within 120 days, and then attach the backup and you should be all set. This is what I do. If nobody's run your taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance within the last couple of years, there's probably, 30% of whatever you build and rent sitting uncollected. I will go and do the work for you to, help you recover that for a percentage of whatever is collected. Right? So you don't pay up front, you just pay upon delivery. Or you could do it yourself, reference the workbook that's attached, get it free at drdigits.com. Either way, go check your deadlines today and collect the money that you're owed. Kyle with Dr. Digits, and thanks for watching.